Glad to have you back. Be part of today's conversations. Let me run you through a list of our Twitter handles. We're at Channels TV, at This Morning, at Harriet Agbeni, and at Bosin Business. Of course, the biggest story on tap is the bailout of the states. Now, the reports that President Muhammadu Buhari approved the release of about 713.7 billion naira intervention fund for the federal and state governments to pay salaries was greeted with mixed reactions. Of course, listening to the analysis from Bosin, it was from the NLNG dividends paid to the federal government for the period. Now, that's what's come out to save the federal and state governments with regards payment of salaries, which we know a number of states owe. Let's take a quick look at some of those states to remind us of which particular civil servants from states should be getting particularly happy at this time. Unfortunately, we do not have that to put out for you, but we hope to get that before the end of the show. Now we have Abia, we have Bauchi, Benue, Ekiti, Enugu, Gombe, Imo, Kogi, Ondo, Oshun, Oyo, Plateau, and River States. And some of the salaries are from between 1 to 9 months. But of course, this would likely have changed because there hasn't been any payment just yet. And so until that time, so we have salaries being owed between 1 and 10 months. Some states have actually not confirmed how much it is. It's not been confirmed how much it is that they owe. But that's what we're talking about on the program today. We're looking at the 713.7 billion naira federal government bailout. I'm being joined from our Abuja studio by a development economist, Odelim Enweregba. Mr. Enweregba, good morning to you, and thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you for having me.
Let's quickly give us your thoughts on this this lifeline, this bailout, as it were, of the states and of the federal government.
First and foremost, we have to thank the president for the intervention he has made. That shows that the pain these workers have been going through, also he felt it. That's why he rose up and ensured that some of the money that the states would have gotten by the end of the month, the money was meant to be available earlier than then, which means possibly this week. And also the fact that they asked CBN to provide some intervention funds between 250 and 300 billion to help some of the states. And also asking the Debt Management Office to restructure the commercial loans of these banks, of these states. Because what has been happening is that some of these states, when they go to FAC, Federation Accounts Allocation Committee meeting, the money they are owing, that is the interest accruing to the money they are owing to the banks, are actually deducted from the source. So as a result, some of them wouldn't have enough money to go around. But also, I would have loved also the president to ban more loan, more borrowing by the states, which means it must instruct the CBN and the Debt Management Office to ban any state from borrowing any money, which means the CBN can ask the bank, you cannot lend to any of these states any longer until we deal with the debt issue that we have now at hand.
But Mr. Enweregba, how realistic is that? Because don't forget, they also have projects that they need to take care of. And the only way that they can sustain this is by going to borrow, either by raising a bond or going to the banks to borrow.
You see, the problem is that most of the money they have borrowed has been to pay salaries. You know that. Most of the money have been borrowed. Some of the states have been borrowing to pay salaries. Now, some states borrowed to do projects, and of course, some of these projects were not actually viable in the sense they are not adding value to the local economies. So I think at the end of the day, you can stop borrowing for the time being until we restructure the way borrowing can take place. So that if we say that borrowing must take place purely for projects that add value to the state economies, and for this borrowing to take place, it must go through beyond the state. It must go through also the the presidency and the National Assembly. Because you have seen it now, the debt is now going, the problem of the debt is now on the nation. And whether you like it or not, the president's intervention has become inevitable. So he who pays the piper calls the tone. So what I'm saying now is that we have to put a stop to the current borrowing until we solve the problem, until we see how viable the loans the states have obtained are, and whether there will be a way to restructure the process of borrowing so that they will not fall into the trap they have found themselves today.
Mr. Enwereba, let's talk about this loan restructuring. How long do you think this restructuring should be? You started talking about it, but let's flesh it up a little bit.
You see, I don't know, because it is a debt management office that is going to restructure this. Each state is going to talk to state by state. But my fear is that the debt you are going to restructure, the money belongs to commercial banks. How do commercial banks have money? Depositors' money. Commercial banks will not print naira. So how do you make sure that the commercial banks themselves do not fall into a trap of liquidity trap? Because if they fall into liquidity trap, they must need their money, because they will not make it clear to you that, look, this money we lent to you was money that belonged to depositors. So what I'm saying is that it is difficult. And I will tell you how difficult I'm seeing it. The only way out, but it's going to be a difficult way, is if the president should go extra mile and ask CBN to pay up the 660 billion. People will say it's controversial, but if you do not do it, it means that the banks will quickly ask for their money, because they are profit maximizers, and you don't need to force them to hold their debt for 5 years, 15 years to restructure it. They will ask you that this money belongs to depositors, and they need the money. So either we do quantitative easing, that is government borrows money, prints money through the CBN, or we go to pension fund or go to AMCON and find a way we can get money to use those funds to restructure the debt. That's what I'm thinking. But if you think that you can tell the commercial banks to walk away and wait 15 years or 5 years, they may not accept it.
Exactly, because you see, from the way you've outlined it, it seems as if this will now kind of encourage fiscal indiscipline among the states as well, which is what, as much as possible, a lot of market watchers would rather not see happen. And then, of course, not take us back to that situation where salaries cannot be paid.
Now, one of the things I think we have to do, my sister, you see, it hurts my heart when we lie to ourselves, because long as we lie, everybody falls in line, it is okay. Nobody wants to tell the truth. The truth is that 36 states plus FCT were created before democracy, return of democracy. Nobody thought about it. How viable are these states? How can they generate generate their revenue internally in order to meet their upkeep, which is recurrent? Now we have discovered that without federal allocation, these states are not viable. Most of them, if not 90% of them. So what we have to look at is that, is there any way we have to rethink about these states? Do we insist that give them 10 years or 5 years to be able to migrate from using federal funds for their recurrent to start using 100% their fund for capital, for recurrent? So that if they cannot generate enough money for recurrent, it means that some of these states, we have to rethink whether some of these states are viable or not, so that we do not repeat what is going on. So I'm suggesting that there must be a bill sent to National Assembly where states will be asked that we allow you from 2015 to 2020 to be able to migrate from dependent on federal allocation to dependent on locally internally generated revenue. If you cannot do that, then we find a way to merge you with a neighbor state, or we find a way to really make you merge with another state, so that you become, merging with another state, you become more viable. I think people will say this is controversial, but let's see why we should continue to have states that are not viable, that are dependent on federal government. And the pressure on the economy is too much. Could you imagine the amount of money we have spent between 2015 and we have received between 2015 and between 2011, sorry, to 2015 is $301 billion oil revenue alone. And 90% of this money, you can't account for it. It has gone into paying salaries. I will assure you, Harriet, if by the time you do forensic personnel auditing of all the state workforce and federal, you will be assured that about 30 to 40% are ghost workers. Why should we go on this way? So something drastic must be done, and I'm sure that Buhari is patriotic enough and is sincere enough that he has to take the bull by the horn.
But Mr. Iwegbera, let me quickly cut in here because we're fast spent for time. In fact, we're almost done with this particular segment. If you can, in 60 seconds or less, give us a map of how it should be going forward. Because you see, the states have been bailed out now. Eventually, if we have another or some other states who didn't fall in this particular category, you know, falling into it, beginning to owe salaries, do you think that this should continue to apply to only states with salary challenges, or should it be free for all? Let it be open for any state that has this kind of challenge. The federal government will bail you out.
I think you are misunderstanding what federal government did. Federal government did not bail anybody out. What federal government did was to give them the money that they are supposed to have later this month or early next month. The only thing federal government did was to ask CBN to intervene with 300, between 250 and 300. So it's not bailout. Let's be very sincere about it. The only bailout is the 250 to 300 billion. But there are conditions attached to it. Because the CBN will sit down with state after state and look at their problems. So it is not just like you go there and you line up, you'll be given a check. No. What federal government did is that by the time you go now as state head, they will look at your problem and look at how they can help you. If they give you that money, how can you return the money? Are you going to deduct? Are we going to deduct it from your from what you receive from the federation account every month? So that's that. I think going forward, what we need to do is that we have to insist on appropriation. No state should spend outside the appropriation. If you don't budget for it, you don't spend it. Also, we have to reinforce our campaign finance law because it's weak, so that nobody can spend public money on campaign or things like that. We're also going to make sure that if the state cannot pay these salaries, we find a way to create Workers' Bank of Nigeria, where at the end of the month, when you go to PAC meeting, you show how you are going to pay your workers' salary for that month. If you cannot, CBN will deduct it and pay to Workers' Bank of Nigeria, and the Workers' Bank will now pay to workers in your state. We have to take drastic measures, because if not, we continue to return to this issue time without number.
Mr. Iwegbera, thank you so much for joining me on the program today and sharing your perspectives with us. Of course, this conversation doesn't end here. It will continue at a later date, as this is a developing story.
Thank you.
Business Morning continues in just a moment. We turn our attention to another issue: labor productivity and wages.